Good morning. My name is Lisa Abbott. I'm the Vice President of Community and Economic Development for Regional Opportunity Initiatives, and we're really excited to have you with us this morning. We're going to talk about how to finance infrastructure. Those of you who have been working with us on some development projects know that this is a big issue for us, and so we're trying to figure out ways to help you guys get this done, and we're excited about our panel here this morning. We have William Harkins from Indiana Finance Authority, Christmas Hudgens from the Office of Community and Rural Affairs at the state, and Rochelle Owen from the USDA, and Thomas Pittman from Thornburg, and they're going to talk about all the ways that we can get infrastructure installed in our areas. So with that said, I would like to encourage you to ask questions along the way, put them in the chat, and we will monitor the chat and make sure that your questions get answered. And so in order to respect your time, without further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Harkins to join me here on screen, and we will get started. Oh, and for your information, their bios are on our website and you can check them out there. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So again, good morning. This is Bill Harkins from the Indiana Finance Authority's SRF loan program. And I wanted to again thank Regional Opportunities Initiative for inviting the IFA to participate in this webinar. And I look forward to chatting with you all today. And also wanted to take this as a quick opportunity to thank my co-presenters, Christmas, Rochelle, and Tom. So what I intend to do here today is first just to provide a brief overview of the Indiana Finance Authority's SRF loan programs, and then switch to a little bit of a more focused concentration discussing some of the new funding opportunities in our program. So by way of introduction, I think everyone's aware, but I'll make the point that we have received a significant amount of new funding from the federal government via the federal bipartisan infrastructure deal, which of course was signed by Congress in November of 2021. And since then, we have been implementing that new act. And what we're going to be talking about here today at the second half of our conversation is the money that has been appropriated to the IFA and how it has made its way to the SRF loan program and how we can in turn provide it to communities across the state, including those on today's webinar. So at the beginning, it's important to note what it is that we, the SRF, do. So primarily what we do is we provide financing to communities all across the state for important water and sewer projects. And those are similar projects that also can be funded through the USDA's RD program and through the OCRA program as well. So when we talk about funding opportunities from agencies, keep in mind that it's not just the SRF that can provide the funding, but as Christmas and Rochelle will outline later, and as Tom will infer and point to, there are other funding opportunities in addition to the SRF. So while we say that we are receiving additional funds and we have received our first tranche from the federal government from the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have been around since the late 90s, and our funds do originate at the federal government. They are appropriated from the US Congress to the federal EPA, who in turn grants funds to the IFA, and the IFA administers those funds for the state. Important features of our program include that we offer below market rates. We're going to discuss that here in a little bit more detail in a second. We also provide generally 20-year repayment periods where, as of a few years ago, we've been able to offer what we refer to as extended term financing, which to us means terms up to 35 years for certain projects, primarily limited to those projects that include what we refer to as pipe improvement projects. Another feature of our program is that we review all disbursements to ensure that all the expenses related to projects that we finance are eligible pursuant to our agreement, and we make sure that those disbursements are completed within a 10-day period so that upon our receipt of a disbursement, we pay the borrower's contracts ideally and hopefully within 10 days of our receipt of those requests. And so let's then, Maren, there we go. So this slide summarizes our program history. So we like to note that we have completed, over 600 sewer financings, over 300 drinking water financings, and served nearly every community in the state. So at this point in our program history, it is rare for us to hear from a community that has not come through our program, but nevertheless, we are sometimes surprised by communities who have not come through our program. So if that happens to be any of you on today's webinar, we would encourage you through whether it's your grant administrator, your consulting engineer, your bond counsel, or your financial advisor, to reach out to us to talk about possible funding opportunities. So it is also important to note how the scale of our project. So our project, or rather our program. So our program is now actually approaching a $7 billion fund, and we manage those funds. And we have noted that over the last 4 years, that we have allowed for communities to save over $450 million in completing financing with our program, as compared to completing a similarly cited financing in the open market. And what we ask for the community's financial advisor to do is to take a look at the interest expense that a community would pay by completing a financing in the open market, compare that to the expense paid to our program, and analyze the difference. And that's what this shows us, that again, over the last 4 years, communities have saved $450+ million by completing projects with our program. Okay, so what this slide does is it gives us a little bit of an overview of how one navigates a community through our program. So it all begins with generally reaching out to one of our program administrators. We have a water program administrator and a sewer program administrator. Their contact information is found on our website. And a good first place to start is by contacting one of those individuals and asking whether the project that the community is considering financing is eligible through our program. If it is, then the community, if they decide to apply to our program, submits an application to us. That is then followed by submitting what is called a preliminary engineering report. And then we review that report and we complete a ranking and a scoring of all projects. And we post something called a project priority list. And we post those at the beginning of every state fiscal year. And if a community is posted or included on that list and is in something called our fundable range, we set aside funds to that community during that state fiscal year. And then we complete a financing and we close the loan. And that is the general process to complete the financing. It is then followed by two main parts, which would be first, drawing down the loan proceeds over a 2-year period. And then second, making sure that the community services the debt by paying monthly, or rather by transferring monthly payments to your trustee bank, and by making, whether it is annual or semi-annual principal and interest payments to the trustee bank to pay down the debt. Okay, so this slide shows us our current rates in our current quarter. So our rates are reset every quarter, and these are the most recent rates that we just posted a few days back. And it is important to note that these are based on a what we refer to as the municipal market data index, which is an index that we use. And we look at a 30-day scale of that index and then take 90% of that amount. And then from that base amount, we further reduce that rate by looking at communities' median household income and post-project user rates, resulting in this table. So that currently, if a community has a median household income under $46,588 and has post-project user rates over $50, that community would be eligible for a 2% loan on its SRF borrowing. And then we conduct that same analysis for all other communities that have different fact patterns, which could be shown here on this table in the other 8 boxes. We also like to, on that interest rate point, note that those amounts can be reduced by as much as 50 basis points. So if we go to the lower right-hand corner and we see that for a community that may have a median household income over $58,000, and for sewer post-product user rates under 40, or I can't, that box is hiding on me, then that community could reduce its interest rate by as much as 50 basis points if it includes either what we call green project reserve components or includes a non-point source project, which is generally defined by us as a project where a community replaces homes that are on, or systems that are on septic tanks and converts them to a collection system. Those communities could reduce their interest rate from 3.12 by as much as 50 basis points. And that applies to all of our boxes, noting that we do have a floor of 2% for our sewer projects. The floor for our drinking projects is also 2%, noting that if a community includes a lead service line project component and the cost of that project are significant enough, we can reduce on that drinking water lead service line project the rates all the way down to 0%. Okay, so what this slide tells us is that we have 4 new funding opportunities. So the basic funding opportunities for our program are the classic sewer project and drinking water projects. And this year, we have set aside $350 million for sewer projects and $100 million for drinking water projects. Those amounts are being complemented and supplemented by these 4 new funding opportunities. And as we tick through each of the next 4 slides, we can discuss those in greater detail. So the Water Supplemental Fund allows for, let me say that differently. The Water Supplemental Fund, the expectation is that we anticipate receiving at least $43 million each of the next 5 years from the US Treasury, making its way through the EPA. And we know that of that $43 million, at least this year, the agreement we signed with the EPA requires for us to appropriate 49% of $43 million to communities in the form of grants. It is important to note that that 49% that is going to communities in the form of grants is structured, and Tom may make reference to this, he may not, but that is structured in the form of what we describe as a principal forgiveness bond anticipation note. And provided the community remains in good standing with our program, that principal forgiveness band, also known as a forgivable loan, is forgiven upon successful completion of the project. That 49% of the $43 million must go to what we describe and what the federal government describes as disadvantaged communities. In Indiana, we define that as a community that has an income, a median household income that is 80% of the state's median household income, which equates to a median household income of $46,600. So that if a community's median household income is under that amount, it is eligible for receipt of disadvantaged community grant funding. The second new funding opportunity pursuant to that bipartisan infrastructure deal that we referenced at the top is an additional, this year, $27.5 million in drinking water supplemental funding. And we anticipate receiving at least that amount or greater each of the next 5 years. It's for the similar projects we described earlier, basic water treatment and distribution system improvement projects, noting that just like with our sewer supplemental fund, 49% of these funds must go to disadvantaged communities, applying the same methodology we do in our sewer program. The third new funding opportunity for us is our lead service line replacement fund. This is an initiative that is important to both the federal EPA and to our state program. And this year we are receiving, or have received, a grant of just over $43 million, where 49% of that needs to and is required to be awarded to communities across the state in the form of a principal forgiveness grant. And those grants must go to communities that are described and defined as disadvantaged communities. And I think then we can go to the fourth and final new funding. So this is new to us. So this is, as everyone has heard in the news, an important federal and state initiative where we are aware that emerging contaminants are now are often found, if not universally found, in our water supplies. And we are required to provide 100% of the funding we receive from the federal government in our emerging contaminant funds. We have a clean water and a drinking water emerging contaminant fund, and those both need to be awarded to, or rather in the form of a 100% grant, and 25% of the awarded amount from the federal government must go to disadvantaged communities. Okay, so important things to note are our schedule. So unlike rural development, which we'll talk about after Christmas section, we are and operate on a state fiscal year where, of course, USDA as a federal agency operates on a federal fiscal year. So the state fiscal year, as you probably are aware, runs from July 1 to June 30th each year. And we operate on a quarterly system where we endeavor to complete somewhere between 20 and 25 borrowings each quarter. And we use our fourth quarter as what we describe as a bypass quarter for any borrowings that were unable to be completed in one of the first three quarters. And it's important to remember that we have already appropriated all of our funding for the current state fiscal year. And so communities that are interested in completing financings with us would know that funding is available to them this year. And now would be a good time to apply to us for funding for each of the next 4 years to receive some of the funding that we described earlier. So the way to, again, we kind of made reference to this just a little bit earlier. The way to place a community on our calendar is first to submit that preliminary engineering report along with the application to our program. And provided that the project ranks within our fundable range, that then makes the borrower eligible to be placed on our quarter, and we will complete a financing with borrowers on a first come, first served basis, placing borrowers in each respective quarter reflected by when we receive the request and when communities meet our programmatic requirements. And we post that information on our webpage. What we will look for prior to placing a community on that closing calendar is ensuring that the project has been bid, that all permits are approved, all necessary land is acquired, and that all programmatic requirements have been met. Once that is satisfied, we'll place you on that closing quarter and complete a financing as requested. So that's an overview of our program, and I will I think Lisa is intending, if I understand, to reserve time at the end for questions.
Yes, if you have any questions, we have fixed the chat, so please put them in the chat and we will make sure that we get them answered. Thank you very much for that information. It was very informative. And next up, we have Christmas Hudgens from the State Office of Community and Rural Affairs, and she's going to talk about community development block grants. So Christmas, would you like to join me on the screen?
Oh. Can you hear me okay, Lisa?
I can hear you.
It is not allowing me to turn my video on.
Oh, well.
There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
All right. So without further ado, I'm going to let you take it away. Please, again, remember, put your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's nice to be with all of you today. I have the privilege of representing the Office of Community and Rural Affairs. Of course, as many of you know, the Indiana Office of Community and Rural Affairs was established as a separate agency by the state legislature in 2005. Our executive director, Denny Spinner, who many of you know, is appointed by the lieutenant governor, who also serves as the secretary for rural development. And so, of course, that aligns with OCRA's mission, which is to work with local, state, and national partners to provide resources and technical assistance to aid our rural communities in shaping and achieving their vision for community and economic development. OCRA is all about rural. Our primary focus is on our rural communities who possess just an extraordinary natural beauty, from our alluring small towns and historic structures. We know that we need to be strategic and intentional about how that beauty is preserved and enhanced and developed. And that includes infrastructure and frank conversations about the needs that exist. But you will hear us say frequently that the heart and soul of Indiana is our rural communities, and that when rural Indiana succeeds, the rest of the state succeeds. And for that reason, OCRA remains committed to ensuring that we're consistently serving the most current needs of our rural areas. And there are many pressing needs that require outside financial assistance. And we are very grateful that through the Office of Community and Rural Affairs, Indiana is able to request federal funding to help rural communities improve their quality of life and ensure the health and safety of their citizens. One of the primary ways that we do that is through the Community Development Block Grant Program. If you advance me to the next slide, I want to chat a little bit about that particular funding resource. So as many of you know, CDBG, as it is affectionately called, is a flexible program. It provides communities with resources to address a wide range of development needs. It is one of the longest continuously administered programs through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's been around since 1974. Each year, HUD allocates a portion of its budget to fund the CDBG program, with a goal of developing sustainable communities through the development of decent housing, suitable living environments, and opportunities to expand economic opportunity, principally for low and moderate income persons. And we'll talk a little bit more later about what that means. But in general, when we talk about community development activities in CDBG, we're talking about building stronger and more resilient communities through an ongoing process of identifying and addressing needs, assets, priority investments. In 2021, HUD allocated nearly $3.5 billion overall for the CDBG program. According to their statistics, since 1974, the total amount of CDBG funds allocated goes over and above $160 billion. So definitely something that we have hopefully developed a good understanding of, and that we're excited to talk about whenever we're invited to do so. So I appreciate the invitation today. Important to note, CDBG funds states, metropolitan cities, urban counties directly. Organizations and individuals cannot receive funds directly from HUD. We'll talk about eligible entities more a little bit later, but HUD uses a formula to allocate funds to so-called entitlement grantees. Those are our metropolitan areas with at least 50,000 people, specifically designated large cities, every county with a population of more than 200,000. They receive 70% of all CDBG funds. HUD distributes the remaining 30% of CDBG funds to states. And then it's localities within the state that submit applications to OCRA and compete for the CDBG funds that are available, and that's what we refer to as non-entitlements. In Indiana, CDBG funds can be utilized to address construction or renovation of various infrastructure projects like water, wastewater, solid waste facilities, streets, flood control projects, construction or improvements of a range of different types of community facilities, senior centers, health and social service centers. We're going to try to stay focused on infrastructure improvements today, because I know that that is why we're here. But before we dig into the details of those specific programs, I do want to share a little bit with you about how Community Development Block Grant recipients prove that they're meeting national goals and how we go about planning and deciding how we allocate the funding that the state receives. If you can move me to the next slide, I do want to talk briefly about our annual action plan. Each year, OCRA publishes our annual action plan for the upcoming fiscal year that also serves as the state's application for funds to HUD. We typically submit that around mid-May, but that plan includes the expected funding resources and stated community development goals. It provides information about planned projects including their geographic distribution, the activity categories, development objectives they fall under. The creation of that action plan includes community outreach, public meetings, the solicitation of requests for proposals from city government departments, local nonprofits, of activities that could be funded. But very, very important that that is something that we all collaborate on. I mean, ideally, you as a community have been involved in the state's planning process. You've communicated to us what your priorities and needs related to the CDBG program are to optimize our opportunities to promote your success when deciding how we're going to spend our CDBG funding each year. To better understand how we can align projects directly with the goals stated in the plan and the method of distribution that we've proposed, we need to hear from you. We need to better understand what those needs look like so that we can align our priorities accordingly. And so it's important to take advantage of that opportunity to get involved and to be an active participant in that action plan process. And then from there, communities work to understand the state's goals, and they can kind of cascade down, develop local strategies for achieving those goals within their communities. We are required to report out every year on our activities. We submit what's called a Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report, or a CAPER, covering the previous fiscal year's activities to HUD at the end of every September to ensure that our communities, that we as a state are meeting those objectives. It includes a description of progress made in accomplishing those objectives and a summary use of such funds during the previous fiscal years. So that is something that we typically post as well for public comment, so that you can learn more as a community about how much money we've obtained, how much funding we've been able to leverage with CDBG dollars from other federal, state, local partners, private sources for each activity, the number of persons, households, or businesses affected, and things of that nature. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to start with the primary objective of this particular funding source. The primary objective of CDBG is to develop viable communities by helping to provide decent housing and suitable living environments, expanding economic opportunity principally for persons of low to moderate income. To achieve those goals, the CDBG regulation defines eligible activities and the national objective that each activity must meet. So as the recipient of state CDBG funds, OCRA is charged with ensuring that each project we fund meets at least one national objective, and that the project is in fact an eligible activity according to those regulations. We often refer to the LMI national objective as the primary national objective because the statutes require that recipients expend 70% of the CDBG funding we receive to benefit low to moderate income persons. For water infrastructure projects, that means area benefit. If you move us to the next slide, you'll see that the area benefit category is probably the most commonly used national objective for activities that benefit a residential neighborhood. There are other methods, presumed class income verification, job creation and retention, some of which we use here in Indiana, some of which we don't. But it's important to note that if you do have a potential project that you think may be eligible for CDBG funding, that you talk with us ahead of time to better understand what national objective category and what eligible activity could potentially fit to achieve your project goals and objectives. When we talk about an area benefit activity, what we're talking about is one that benefits all residents of a particular area. Within that area, at least 51% of the residents must be considered low to moderate income according to HUD's income limits. Examples of area benefit activities include things like acquisition, construction of a health clinic, improvements to public infrastructure, but the area must be at least 51% LMI according to the census data, or you have the option as a community, if you can provide a reasonable justification as to why the census data may not be accurate, to request permission to conduct what's called an income survey to verify that low to moderate income percentage in the area. But very important to note that the project's activities need to benefit all residents in that project area, that project area must be primarily residential, and that the project is considered to be a benefit to LMI persons of at least 51% in order to qualify. So that 51% is key. Once you've defined the area, you need to ask yourself two questions. Who are the beneficiaries of the project? are the low to moderate income persons defined by HUD. And that's very much the same as what Bill described. It's total household income equal to or less than 80% of the median family income from the county in which the project is located. We publish those income limits every year. And that is what you would work with your certified grant administrator on. We'll talk a little bit about their role in the process here in a bit. But that's the first question. Who are the beneficiaries and where do those persons live? That defined area could be as small as a single neighborhood within a town or as large as multiple counties, depending on the type of project. But that LMI population of the area has to be determined in order to move forward with the CDBG project, because that national objective piece is key. You start with the most recent HUD census data, or you can request permission to conduct an income survey, but that national objective must be identified in the grant application prior to the award of any funding, and documentation of the percentage of LMI beneficiaries has to be provided with the application as well. The national objective is not met until we're able to review all that. We're able to confirm the beneficiaries. If you're awarded, then once the activities are carried out, we will review that as part of our closeout process, and that's when it is ultimately final and it's determined that the national objective is met and accepted. So as far as who is eligible, if you move us to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about eligible entities. So the minimum requirements to be eligible for CDBG funded projects. Lead applicants are what we call non-entitlement cities, counties, or incorporated towns that possess the legal capacity to carry out the proposed program. Under the state CDBG program, non-entitlement localities are known as units of general local government. So these are communities that do not receive their funding directly from HUD. For non-incorporated communities, then that would mean the county would be the local municipality with the legal capacity to serve as the lead applicant on our particular applications. Now, the lead applicant can contract with non-for-profit organizations to carry out the activities of an eligible project. Those organizations do have to be able to document their nonprofit status with the IRS and the Indiana Department of Revenue and the Indiana Secretary of State. Where we would likely see this on a water infrastructure project would be if you're served by a nonprofit water corporation or if you're part of a regional sewer district. These are pretty common subrecipients that we see on applications for water infrastructure funding. Once you've determined that the proposed project meets a national objective and is an eligible activity under Section 5 of the Housing and Community Development Act, then your next step is to reach out to OCRA and to start chatting with us about the best way to develop the project. We understand, of course, that securing diverse and sustainable funding is a necessity for virtually every community. Local leaders rely on programs like CDBG to address needs, deliver services, demonstrate the results of their work, and to achieve local priorities. But to be successful, you need to make sure that you have a team of people with the knowledge and skills to help lead that process, who understand and can execute the various stages of the grant's life cycle from application through administration. Overseeing a federally funded CDBG grant takes an enormous amount of effort. Writing the application is just the first step. Effective administration and compliance is also critical. It takes that team effort to ensure the funds are spent wisely, efficiently, with the greatest impact. It also takes input from almost everyone in the organization to help communicate to all of you that you've made a wise investment, that you're producing strong returns, which is what our funder, which is what HUD wants to see. They want to see the impact of those investments. One of the ways that we do that, in addition to providing technical resources and support, we have a program team here at OCRA in Indianapolis who work to help administer the CDBG program. We also have our community affairs team. We'll talk a little bit about your community liaisons here in a bit. We have our grant services team who serve the family of business and who take over during the administration phase of an awarded grant to help ensure compliance through implementation to close out. And then, of course, we have our locally certified grant administrators. Since 1994, the state of Indiana has required formal certification of all persons administering CDBG projects in Indiana. The program, of course, involves fairly complex administrative and financial procedures that is regulated by federal statute and state policy. So having someone locally who has knowledge of those applicable regulations and policies is pretty essential to achieve a high level of efficiency in the oversight of our grant awards. In practice, GAs help communities and public agencies work together to improve services, the ways in which decisions are made. At the most simple, in the most simple terms, the best way to think of grant administrator certification is like an insurance policy. It protects grantees from unnecessary monitoring findings due to inexperienced local administrators. GAs grease the wheels, so you don't run afoul of regulations. So in order to apply for a CDBG grant, you will have to secure the services of a local grant administrator who will essentially serve as a project manager, who can help to advise you on the requirements of the grant and who can help coordinate conversations during the project development phase with the CDBG team here in Indianapolis, with our community liaison team across the state, and then ultimately they coordinate with our grant services team through the administration process to make sure you're able to complete your project successfully. What types of projects can we fund? Well, let's move ahead and talk quickly about planning grants. The planning grant program is designed to aid communities in developing strategies for addressing their areas of greatest need through meaningful citizen participation. The goal of the program is to encourage you to plan for long-term community development. Communities interested in planning for projects relating to such issues as infrastructure and community facilities are encouraged to apply. But to be considered, the project must demonstrate the following. They have to meet the goal of the federal act, right? National objective plus eligible activity equals fundability. The particular planning project needs to address established long-term community priorities. The grants, the funds granted need to demonstrate that they will have a significant impact on the overall project. The community has to demonstrate a strong commitment to the project and its sustainability, and that the project is ready to proceed upon grant award and completed within 10 months after award. But for communities that need to engage in a holistic planning process, who want to look at what their needs are, who want to organize strategies and action items to achieve their vision, for communities that need to establish a vision for that particular area within their community so that they can get information that they need to not just plan projects and to develop preliminary engineering for those specific projects, but to achieve kind of a cohesive approach to how they're going to prioritize and implement those projects. That's what OCRS planning is all about. If we move on to the next slide, you'll see what types of planning grants we offer. Localities can undergo community improvement projects using our planning grant process to create a methodology, prioritize the highest community development needs. It means a detailed description of exactly what the community is going to do to address the problem. Plan lays out major components of the activity, describes who will do what, when, how they'll do it, describes the roles and responsibilities of the various groups involved and the resources that the community is going to provide for that effort. Some of our more popular plan types include water infrastructure grants that allow communities to take a look at the potential issues and opportunities for their drinking, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. It helps you to identify what your urgent water infrastructure needs look like while understanding more about how each system works in context with those other utility systems so that you can appropriately prioritize projects. We also offer resources for comprehensive plans, broadband readiness plans, which is not water infrastructure, but it is certainly a key piece of infrastructure within your community. We can provide assistance and planning to address what a community's broadband needs are as well. For master utility studies, water infrastructure plans, we do have max grant amounts that you can request. For water infrastructure plans, that is $90,000. For comprehensive plans, it is limited to $60,000. For economic recovery plans, $50,000. Broadband readiness plans are limited to $70,000. And I also do want to note that all of these planning grants require a minimum of a 10% local match. As far as what the overall process looks like, if you go to the next slide, we've provided you with kind of a snapshot of what that looks like. It starts with the round opening and with the community reaching out to their local community liaison to notify the office of their intention or their interest in submitting an application for planning grant funding. Absolutely vital and a required element of the process that the community collaborate with their community liaison to get technical assistance during the application's development, to seek advice on the planning grant process. One big change that I do want to note is we did recently return to a requirement where we had tried something. This is one thing that I love about Okra. Sometimes we try things. And then based on feedback, we figure out that they didn't work as well as we thought they would. And so we make an adjustment. In this particular case, starting with Q4 of 2022, we have moved procurement of professional services for any planning studies back to before application as opposed to after award. So you can see where we've kind of updated that in our overall process map here. Of course, there are citizen participation and public hearing requirements that occur at different points throughout the process. For planning, you do one public hearing ahead of application. You do your second public hearing once the plan has been completed, reviewed, and approved by Okra to ensure it meets the minimum plan requirements for that plan type. And then it is presented at a second public hearing and then formally adopted by the community before the grant can be closed out. Moving on to construction grants. So construction grants are where we actually start doing the capital improvements work, right? In Indiana, as I mentioned, CDBG can be utilized to address construction, renovation of various infrastructure projects, water, wastewater, solid waste facilities, flood control projects, but it's all about construction. So we divide the funding that we have available into the following program categories. I'm going to focus today on water infrastructure, of course, but our goal for these programs is really to ensure that communities have the necessary infrastructure in place to improve their quality of life and to address the health and safety needs of the residents. That means that for CDBG funded infrastructure projects, we are looking at doing existing it got to be primarily residential, right? So if you have an area of town that currently does not have any existing infrastructure and you want to expand your infrastructure so that you can attract new housing to that area, that is not an eligible activity under CDBG. But if you have residents who are currently experiencing issues, maybe they're experiencing overflows, maybe they're experiencing flooding, we can rehab the existing infrastructure in that community. Or if you have existing homes that are on failing septic or on wells and they want to be able to tap in to the city infrastructure, to the town infrastructure, we can assist with that. But that is an important nuance that I want to highlight. With CDBG, we do have a match requirement for water infrastructure improvement projects, and the goal of that is to ensure that we're able to leverage grant funds with other funding sources that are available so that we can create kind of diverse capital stacks for larger scale improvements. So if we move on to the next slide, I'll give you a little bit of information on what we offer as far as wastewater, drinking water. Just like with our planning grant program, we have maximum grant amounts that are available for each particular program. For wastewater drinking water, it's up to $700,000. For stormwater infrastructure improvements, it's up to $600,000. We do have other programs. I've included them here for everyone's benefit. I'm not going to focus on them today, but we can also provide up to $500,000 to assist with clearance projects. If you have industrial commercial blight in your community, we can assist with that. And our public facilities program. Those are going to be things like libraries, historic preservation, community centers, senior centers, youth centers. Our Main Street revitalization program is also funded with CDBG. It is currently under a moratorium. If you move on to the next slide, here are the details related to our wastewater drinking water program. As you can see, the max funding amount is tiered based on the total project cost and based on what your current user rates look like. For this type of project, we typically see things like new collection lines, we can do treatment plant upgrades, we can do lift station rehabilitation, we can do water towers, we can replace hydrants, we can replace distribution lines, but hopefully this gives you kind of a general idea of the types of eligible activities for our wastewater drinking water program. I will say this is probably our most competitive program. So very, very important that you engage frequently and often with the CDBG team, with your community liaison team, to get insight on how you can develop the project in such a way that not only does it meet the national objective and the minimum requirements to be fundable, but that it is also competitive in terms of how the application is built and how the needs are communicated to the scoring committee, who will ultimately review your application and then make funding decisions. So moving on to the next slide, so we can give you a brief snapshot of our stormwater improvements project. So this is where we're looking at ways to reduce flooding, to reduce energy costs, to protect rivers, lakes, vital landscapes. This is where we can assist with combined sewer separation, storm sewer replacement of deteriorated storm drainage lines, inlets, and construction of relief sewer for the undersized storm sewer mains, things of that nature. The maximum grant award for stormwater is $600,000 and the local match requirement is 10%. And I don't think that I mentioned it, but for wastewater drinking water, the local match requirement is 20%. Moving on to the next slide. Obviously, this is a little bit more of an involved process than our planning grant process. The turnaround time on construction projects is typically 18 months. The life cycle for our construction grants is 3 major stages, from pre-award, award, post-award. The recipient, you as the lead applicant, and the award, we all have unique roles at each stage of the process. But once the round opens, we send out basically what amounts to a call for proposals. A proposal is essentially a draft application that gives us a better idea of what the project's details look like, so that we can do a compliance review. We can review the proposal, come out, do a site visit, provide technical assistance, and ask questions related to the details that were provided to potentially identify any points of non-compliance or ineligibility, get those addressed before the formal application submission. At that point, applications are scored by committee, and then awards are determined before we send out grant agreements. I won't unpack the details related to all of these benchmarks and milestones within the process, but just know that there are distinct activities, things that have to occur in a specific order as you move through the administration process in order to execute the process successfully. And so that is always, of course, something that we provide assistance with, and you would work with your grant administrator and grant services to achieve. Moving on to our grant funding cycles and timelines. All of our funding is competitive. Planning grants are offered competitively. They open up quarterly until funding runs out for the year. We are currently in the midst of an open planning round. In fact, applications are due Friday on the 14th, at which point we will begin our review of those applications in anticipation of an award announcement in November. For construction grants, we typically open up twice a year. As I said, planning grants are a single stage process. Construction grants are a 2-phase process. And so we try to release that calendar typically in November. As we found out, though, all of those dates are subject to change. So very, very important that you sign up for Okra updates to make sure that you check that calendar regularly, make sure that you're getting the most up-to-date information, because from year to year, the allocation of funds, the number of grants that we award can vary. Our application instructions include detailed description of each fund, the eligible activities, what that application and award process looks like. They are updated for each application cycle. We notify everyone through our website when those application instructions are available and through statewide announcements for the upcoming application period. And it is really recommended that you stay on the lookout for that information so that you can apply successfully when you're ready. Moving on to the next slide. Here's where you can find our Okra calendar. Please check that page regularly and our website for the latest details. We do have some recent calendar updates that are now posted. As many of you are likely aware, we experienced a delay in being able to announce our 2022 Round 1 awards. Our sincerest congratulations to all of the communities who received funding for their projects this round. So far, we've been able to effectively address any incidental questions or impacts from these delays on kind of a case-by-case basis. If you do have questions or concerns that we can be helpful with, keep reaching out. We'll do our best to listen and to talk through any needed solutions alongside you. But we have also published our round 2 dates. Round 2 opened up on September 21st. And so we are expecting proposals to come in next Friday, the 21st. And then we will begin to schedule site visits throughout November to provide TA on those submissions before the final application is subsequently due in December. So just want to share with you quickly some contact details. Here's our wonderful CDBG team. Of course, we have Pamela Guerrero, who is our most recent addition to the CDBG team. She's been with us since May. She is responsible for all of our CARES Act funding. So if you are, she's the point of contact for our Connecting Communities and People with Disabilities program, our COVID response programs. She can provide technical assistance and training to communities participating in our Hoosier Enduring Legacy programs and can answer questions related to general CDBG policy. Belanle Oladukin is your point of contact for all things related to GA training and continuing education. She's your point of contact for our planning grant program and anything requiring pre-approval ahead of construction application submission. So requests to conduct income surveys, requests for bonus points on applications, all of that flows through Belanle. And then I do hope to have another staffing update for you soon, as we do have an accepted offer for our open senior CDBG program manager position. And we're excited to be able to add to our team and expand our capacity to provide support. I also want to mention our community liaison staff. For those of you who don't already know, we have community liaisons. We have field outreach personnel strategically located throughout the state to assist communities in accomplishing their goals. CLs work with you to locate funding and other resources for your community and economic development process, as well as to facilitate the meeting of local officials, state and federal agencies, other entities. Our goal is to get you the information you need to make sound decisions on behalf of your residents. We want to make sure that you have the access that you need to those necessary resources. CLs can help you to do that. Maybe CDBG isn't the best fit. If it's not for this particular project, they will work alongside you to identify another resource that might be a good fit. So do feel free to reach out to them. Their contact details can be found on our CDBG staff directory. Many of them, I believe, are on the call today. So if you don't know who they are, please reach out, get to know them, because they are going to be your best resource for securing the funding that you need for these types of projects. With that, I believe I am handing it off.
Actually, Christmas, before you go dark, I do have a couple questions that are pretty specific to Okra, so I thought we would go ahead and answer those now. That's okay.
Go ahead.
So the first one is, can you define the area for LMI and who makes the decision of that area? So how do you define the geographic boundaries?
It depends on who the beneficiaries are. That's the first question you need to ask yourself when you are determining the service area for a project. Who is being served by the project? Who are the beneficiaries that are going to benefit from the work being done? Where is the work going to be done within the community? And then you would consult typically with us for any custom service areas. HUD provides us with a mapping tool that we can utilize if your particular project happens to align with existing boundaries. Like let's say you're doing a planning grant project, you want to come in for a water infrastructure plan, for example, and it is a town-owned utility that you're looking at. Then in general, the service area would be the municipal boundaries of the town, unless they provide service outside of that municipal boundary, in which case we'd need to map out a custom service area. So it ultimately depends. For water infrastructure projects, you're really just going to need to look at where's the work being done in relation to those existing municipal boundaries, who's being served by the project, and then you would reach out and coordinate with us on any custom service areas to make sure that we are identifying the lowest level of data that HUD would like for us to use, and then going from there in terms of what that LMI percentage looks like, because we can use census block data. Sometimes we use township level data. It really depends on where the work is being done and who's going to benefit from it. So it can be different for every project.
Okay, great. And one more question. Can you use the construction grants for utilities such as electric or natural gas?
Not here in Indiana, no.
All right. All right. Thank you, Christmas, so much. Really appreciate it. Next up, we're going to have Rochelle Owen from USDA. So if you'd like to join me on the screen. Again, I want to remind you, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. And if you have a question that could be answered by any of the three, we'll do it at the end. But if it's specific, we'll do it after that particular speaker. So Rochelle, thank you so much. Without further ado, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming that you can hear me just fine. You have just heard from the two experts of our funding partners. We leverage SRF and CDBG in nearly all of our projects when we speak of water and wastewater projects in rural communities. So thank you, Christmas, thank you, Bill, and thank you, ROI, for inviting us to speak to you all. I want to begin with the next slide. The next slide gives you a little history, but a reminder too that rural development is housed under, yes, that USDA established in 1862 by President Abraham Lincoln. Rural development is a part of the mission and support described there, as well as all of the other USDA. Thank you. All right, you guys, isn't it how it goes? It's perfectly fine. We'll keep moving forward. I spoke to you about U.S. Department of Agriculture and how rural development is part of the agriculture world of federal monies. And so I wanted to briefly allow for some ideas that rural development can help you do. In rural development, and I will speak specifically about infrastructure, but we have many other programs available. And so we do have financial capital resources, not only for public borrowers, but also private borrowers and nonprofit borrowers. And we do support your community needs in the realm of workforce housing, emerging and existing business on the private side, as well as your essential community facilities within your communities. So in the last bullet point, I have some things to think about, you know, from physical to mental health care, police and fire protection, recovery residents, tornado sirens if you have needs for those, the 911 blue light call kiosks. Some of you have rails to trails in your communities, and that's a really great addition to your park systems if you have that. We have revolving loan funds and self-help housing. And I will talk a little bit about most of those, but focusing on infrastructure. You can move to the next slide. The next slide will give you a list and links to follow up with your curiosity. But as I said, I will focus on the first two bullet points, the first one being the most critical piece when it comes to discussing infrastructure needs, water and wastewater. The blood and bones of a community in rural Indiana. There are also, as you see, links available for your perusal later to evaluate some of those things that might be necessary in your community. Your next slide. Here's the basic information for our water and environmental programs. That's all drinking water, wastewater treatment, also stormwater projects in your community. And some communities also have sanitary solid waste disposal facilities within their communities. And that is also an opportunity to for this funding to be utilized to broaden or enhance their solid waste disposal as well. The populations that we serve with our program are rural areas with populations of 10,000 or less. There's a caveat to that story, and that is very fitting for the Southwest section of Indiana, and that is your rural water systems. Of course, your rural water systems often service more than 10,000 in population. The caveat is they are in unincorporated areas and still considered rural. So don't miss the opportunity to evaluate your use of rural development infrastructure monies for those larger facilities that are in unincorporated areas, specifically the drinking water side of things. Our financing is a 40-year term. Our 40-year term in Indiana and across the nation is best suitable for the smallest communities in need. We exist because we are the lender of last resort for those communities who need a longer term to pay their concrete costs, their debt retirement, but have enough room to receive monies within their rates collected to provide for the appropriate operation and maintenance so that they fulfill their need to the community members, as well as their short-lived assets within that utility, making that rate right-sized with having the longer term available to those smaller communities does allow for a smaller community to realize and benefit from having clean drinking water provided to their citizens, as well as wastewater treatment provided to their citizens. We do have an opportunity for communities that are larger than 10,000, 50,000 and less to utilize our guaranteed program. And I can talk a little bit about that if someone has a question. Otherwise, I will focus specifically on the direct program. Our financing is secured with, in general, particularly in Indiana, revenue bonds. Revenue bonds are most common for debt retirement in Indiana on utility services. We have a few opportunities in Indiana to utilize general obligation bonds, but generally speaking, general obligation bonds are a debt retirement tool used in the eastern side of the United States. We do operate on a quarter. The quarter begins October 1, that's the federal fiscal year, and each quarter, we're now in quarter 1 for us. In each quarter, our interest rates will change. We provide for lowest interest rates to those who are in poverty, those communities in poverty, and the higher interest rate are for those who meet the market rate. Market rate, I just want to make sure. Yeah, the market rate begins for communities that make have a median household income higher than $55,784. Those who receive the poverty rate are at a median household income of $44,627. This is a reminder to you all, particularly those who are familiar with our program, but those who are not familiar with our program, this will be news. We are continuing to use the census information from 2010 on population. We are also continuing to use the ACS median household income of 2006 to 2010. We are continuing to utilize those data points through the end of our fiscal year 23, meaning that we will not move to the new data sets until October 1, 2023. That's one reminder I wanted to make mention to you. I also want to brag a little bit on the communities in Indiana and our delinquency rate with rural development, water and wastewater loans made to our communities. Our delinquency rate in Indiana is 0. And across the nation, our delinquency rate is less than 0.5%. So we have a good track record in working with the smallest communities, providing them the right size loan and facilitate both leveraging of other funding partners. And in Indiana, we're very fortunate to have a great relationship with the Indiana Finance Authority and the Office of Community and Rural Affairs to utilize the SRF program and the CDBG program in tandem with any of our applicants who are eligible for their program. Next slide, please. Thank you. The next slide will tell you how to apply. Applying to Indiana for water and wastewater project is quite easy now. There's no paper going back and forth between offices. In the beginning, when a community is applying, they're applying through an electronic system called RD Apply. In this slide, and you will have access to these slides after the viewing, in these slides, you will find further information and detail on how to begin your RD Apply application, including what is a complete application within RD Apply. I have a link there that describes preliminary engineering reports, as well as our format for preliminary engineering reports and the requirements I will speak of in just a minute. You will also find a link to our environmental review regulation, and I recommend any of you who are interested in providing for an application, particularly those who don't have experience with us, contact your local office. And at the end of this slide deck, you will find your contacts for your area. And then the third piece that becomes an application, becomes the final piece of the application, are the community's financials. Next slide. Next slide will show you the fundamental data within a preliminary engineering report. Many of these things will seem very familiar to you, regardless of the experience that you have in community development within your area. We want to know the project area, the planning areas for which you're discussing in the report, a description of the existing facilities. The existing facilities in the utility are important for us to understand because we are interested in maintaining your sustainability as a utility. And that includes all the other elements of your utility as well. You may be only working on one section of your facility, but the existing pieces of your facility are necessary for the whole to continue to work. So we ask for a description of the existing facility. And then the need for the project, you show the justification based on health and sanitation. Health and sanitation can be easily documented with either notices of violation or agreed orders, or your public health needs from your county health department, your system O&M, and whether or not you're going to experience growth. You will describe the alternatives considered. You're going to have a description of each of those. Each of those descriptions are going to come with a cost estimate, including the O&M if those choices were selected. And then your selection of the alternative will be based on the present worth and life cycle and cost analysis. For those engineers on the line, you understand that that present worth life cycle cost analysis will describe what it will cost to operate that alternative over time. If there are reasons for selecting an alternative with a higher life cycle cost analysis, you need to document as to why you would be selecting that higher cost. But it's certainly defendable if you document correctly. The proposed project will describe the recommended alternative. You're going to talk a little bit about the basic design information. You're going to absolutely discuss the total project cost estimate. That includes the soft costs as well, but you're certainly honing in on the construction costs. You're going to talk about that annual operating budget. That annual operating budget will include the income that you will receive from your proposed rate schedule, the equivalent dwelling units within that community, and the flow data that will support those systems. You're going to describe your operation and maintenance costs, as well as your existing debt repayment. Then you're going to discuss your reserves. What do you have on hand? Do you have monies on hand for capital improvement projects? Are those monies set aside for your capital improvement projects dedicated to the project that you're describing in your preliminary engineering report? Do you have existing debt? And also a calculation of the items within your system that require short-lived asset accounting, meaning that if you have several things in your system that need replacement within 5 to 15 years, you're going to describe those elements of your system that do need to be replaced within those 5 to 15 years and assign a cost to those items in that list. That cost then will be broken down so that you can provide for reserves to replace those short-lived assets within the time frame that you have the debt with us for those 40 years. That allows for us to underwrite with the full information of what it means to maintain a sustainable utility within your community. And then finally, that PER will describe the engineer's recommendations to the community. The next slide I'm going to show you is a calculation that's fairly simple that any one of you would be able to do with a conversation with the town's clerk or whomever is collecting the billing information. Get 4 figures from your community. Identify how many gallons are sold to your residential users, and then identify the total gallons sold to everyone in your system. Identify the number of residential connections, and then finally, if possible, discover the total system revenue. That's sales, that's your billing, your taxing and fees, and all your other incomes that come into that particular enterprise fund. The calculations will lead you to how many gallons are used in any one EDU, and then the total number of EDUs within the system. Those 2 pieces of data will inform you where your rates set, regardless of the rate structure that your ordinance provides for. It will allow for you to understand perhaps even the limited use of water in your communities. I understand Southern Indiana, we often see less use of drinking water in the South than we do in the North. It'll be an exercise of instruction for you if you were to identify these bits of information. Certainly within the PER will be helpful. The next slide describes the Community Facilities Program. The Community Facilities Program is not used for infrastructure, but I did want to raise the potential in your community. Applicants can be public bodies. They can also be nonprofit organizations. The objective is simply to provide financing for essential community facilities within your community. Police stations, fire trucks, tornado sirens, the 911 blue light kiosk that I mentioned before. Populations with communities with populations of 20,000 or less are eligible to apply to the Community Facilities Program. We do provide direct loans and grants. We typically see the security being revenue bonds, general obligation, and oftentimes leaseback facilities, leaseback to the facilities. In this particular quarter, community facilities resides at 3.5%. The next slide will show you some ideas what community facilities can provide for. We can build and rehabilitate facilities. I mentioned before recovery residences, meaning that you are building transitional housing for up to 2 years publicly for your community members and others who need that type of facility. Fire and rescue vehicles and the equipment. That means radios and communication centers, all of those types of things necessary. Educational facilities, particularly for public school systems. Rural transportation, dependent care facilities, early warning systems, as I made mention, safety services, health clinics, schools, libraries, hospitals. We can finance up to 100% of the market value. We can finance out to 40 years. Same thinking in that line, that being able to stretch out the debt for the amount of time allows for you to have proper operation and maintenance for that facility. If you're buying a fire truck or a police car, of course, the useful life will be less than that, and we will set the terms to the useful life of the security. I made mention that the interest rate this quarter is 3.5%, and service areas with median household incomes below 50,000 can be considered for grant assistance. The next slide. The next slide will show you a suite of all of our programs in rural development, aside from the public financing that I'm focused on in this presentation. If you click that link, you will be able to find this PDF. This PDF will inform you of all the other programs that we have available to us. The next slide will give you the contacts around the state. These are our community program area specialists. Our community program area specialists are the key to your application. Please contact them as soon as you think you might be interested in using rural development. This is for the public financing side of things, so infrastructure and community facilities. And then I have another slide here, the next slide, that gives you the business contacts as well. Some of you may not be familiar with some of these names and don't have these contacts, and I wish for you to have them. You will see that these folks are positioned to assist any of the economic development corporations, et cetera, to connect to business programs, both on the private side for private rural businesses, but also on the nonprofit side, where there are programs available for relending programs within your communities that are available, that could be made available to your constituents in your area. And before I leave you, I don't have another slide on this, but I'm going to put in the chat a discussion about the Environmental Infrastructure Working Group. The Environmental Infrastructure Working Group is a group of the financiers within Indiana that meet every month. There's a simple 2-page intake document. You will also be able to identify a funding matrix with all of the infrastructure funders available to Indiana, as well as the brochure that describes the Environmental Infrastructure Working Group. We meet each second Thursday of every month at 1 p.m. via Zoom. If you have an interested community, please encourage them to sit down with the EWIG group and discuss. We meet, the participating partners in this program are the Alliance of Indiana Rural Water as a technical assistance provider. We also have, of course, Bill Harkins from the Indiana Finance Authority, Christmas from the Indiana Rural Water Association, myself, Indiana Rural Community Assistance Program, also providing technical assistance, the Army Corps, and the Department of Commerce. The EWIG point of contact is Jamie Palmer. She's leadership for many things, but she's leadership for the EWIG group. And I will also put that in the chat as well. Any questions for me, Lisa? And we'll move to Tom.
No, I think everybody's still trying to calm down from when the webinar went down. So we might have some at the end. We're working on possibly one now that might be having a little bit of technical difficulty on. But we will also post the the links that Rochelle is going to share with you in the chat on our website when we post this webinar. It'll probably take us a few days because now we'll have to do a little additional editing. But we appreciate your patience, and we're so happy that you all came back. Now, thank you, Rochelle, very much. Next up is Thomas Pittman. He is an attorney with Barnes and Thornburg, and he is going to talk to you about things that you can do within your own local community to help finance this. And so we're really excited to have him. Thank you so much for being here. And I am going to let you take it away.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I wanted to start by saying I enjoyed just seeing Rochelle do her presentation. I have worked with her organization many times, and they are a first-class organization, very user-friendly. And so I would encourage you to get to know them better if you don't already. They're a pleasure and to work with great expertise and so helpful. Wanted to get that in. I was very flattered to be asked to participate in this today. I got a call a couple of weeks ago from Lisa, and she said, Tom, Lisa here, you know I wouldn't call you if I weren't desperate, but I've tried 5 other people and I can't get anybody to staff this. Would you do it? I said, well, of course I would, Lisa. So anyway, I was going to say also, Lisa, I think Bill Gates owes you an apology for the tech problems. But
yeah, I don't think Bill Gates caused it, and that's not entirely accurate. Someone said you need to call Thomas Pittman and invite him, and so that's why you're here. We're super excited to have you.
Okay,
so, thank you.
Thank you. I am going to talk today about a new type of financial incentive that Indiana law makes available for cities and towns and counties that have a visit from a developer who wants to do single family housing, for example, which is badly needed in many parts of the state, if not the whole state. And the question is, how can you use TIF to assist them, to incentivize a developer to build housing in your community? The new statutory scheme is called Single Family Residential TIF. Very useful, starting to be widely used around the state. I want to talk about that, but before I do, I always find it useful to kind of back up a few steps to kind of lay the foundation, because there's a lot of underlying information that people sometimes take for granted that the audience knows that I wouldn't know if I hadn't been doing this for 39 years. So I want to talk first, next slide, please, about just the concept of TIF. What is TIF? How does it work? Okay, TIF began in California in the 1950s as a way for local governments to come up with their match funds for federal redevelopment projects. It expanded to all 50 states. There are 1 or 2 that have cut it way back, but it's pretty universal across the country at this point. How does it work? Okay, let me give you kind of a fact situation to follow me on. Okay, so you have an area in your town, and this town has never heard of TIFs. There is an area of the town that the town is focused on as ripe for redevelopment or housing or whatever. Okay, so let's suppose that there's a company that already has a building in that area of focus. Let's talk about what happens in terms of taxes. The owner of that existing building will make tax payments to the county twice a year, as anyone who's a homeowner does. Let's talk about what happens with the money when those taxes get paid. When they get paid, the county officials divide the funds received from property taxes into a pie chart. Across Indiana, the average the average school corporation gets about 40% of the pie. The town will get a slice. The township will get a piece of it. The school corporation will. If there's a library district, which exists in most places, there are a few pockets that don't have library corporations, but almost the entire state does. So there's this pie chart of recipients of pieces of that tax. So when the county officials get the tax money, they divide it up among that pie chart of recipients. That's, of course, how the units in that area fund their activities. Now, let's fast forward, and the town has become familiar with the idea of TIF. And it thinks that the general area where this existing building is ripe for development. So it draws a boundary of a proposed TIF district that includes that existing building, and then vacant ground beyond that. Now, fast forward, and they designate that whole area as a TIF district. Now let's fast forward a couple of years, and after a couple of years, a new business has come in and has put up a building that also costs $1 million. Let's say the first one and the second one both are $1 million. So now let's take a look at what happens when Company A, the earlier company, pays its taxes. The county officials will continue to allocate the taxes from Company A to the pie chart recipients as if there had never been a TIF district created. But when Company B pays its taxes, instead of dividing those taxes among the pie chart recipients, all of the taxes that relate to the new assessed value generated by the development will not go to the pie chart recipients. They will instead, that money will instead be allocated to the local to the local redevelopment commission. Okay, this chart that we have on the screen, let's see how that relates to the hypothetical I just gave you. The base assessed value is that assessed value that corresponds to Project A that I talked about, that pre-existed the TIF district. That money continues to go to all of the underlying taxing units. That's what happens to Company's A taxes. Company B taxes, to the extent that they relate to the increased assessed valuation generated by the project, go to the redevelopment commission for redevelopment purposes. That's the green area. TIF districts don't last forever. And so after the end of the TIF district, all of that new assessed value will go to all of the overlapping taxing units. And so that's kind of how that explains, that's kind of how my hypo relates to that chart. Now, I want to talk a little bit, and I apologize if I'm too basic, but I want to talk about the concept of assessed value, because again, so much of the the world of redevelopment and public finance, it depends on acronyms, which I'm not fond of acronyms. So I want to unpack a little bit what we're talking about. All of the taxable property each year. Well, if you would back up, let's stay on that prior slide if you don't mind. All of the thank you. So each year, the assessor, the assessing officials report to the county officials and to the state the total amount of taxable assessed value within the jurisdiction. So, the town of, Santa Claus, Indiana will have each year a number that has been determined to be the assessed value of all the property in the town. Now, not all assessed value is taxed. Only net assessed value is taxed. So that, for example, the net assessed value that gets taxed takes out any credits, any deductions, that sort of thing. So it really is a netted reduced number. So for example, when the town of Santa Claus goes to prepare its budget, it will look at the assessed value number that it's provided, and it will figure out how much money it needs in its budget. And then it will back into a tax rate such that the tax rate determined by the town times the net assessed value will equal the taxes to be raised to support the town. So that's the concept of assessed value and net assessed value. And that's how rates are generally calculated by any given taxing unit. Go ahead and fast forward. Go ahead and go to the next slide if you would, please. Okay, so procedures for establishing a TIF district. I don't want to dwell on this because this is, your attorneys will help with this. But basically, you start off by establishing a redevelopment commission in the town. Very easy to do. It has to have 5 members who live in the jurisdiction. That process of setting up the redevelopment commission can be done in a week. The process then for creating the TIF district, sometimes referred to as an allocation area, includes about 5 steps. The first step is passage of a declaratory resolution. Second is Plan Commission approval, followed by city or town council approval, followed by a public notice process, a public hearing back at the redevelopment commission, adoption of a confirmatory resolution. Then, of course, after that's done, you have to let the auditor know what parcels are in your TIF district so that the county officials can monitor and implement the TIF program. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, I've included in the outline I did a list of some frequently used terms, and I want to take a few minutes to go through those because again, terms get bandied about in the area of municipal finance and redevelopment that can stand some unpacking. You hear the phrase such as taxes 2021 pay 2022. The reason that term is used is that when taxes get paid in 2022, those taxes are actually a liability for whoever owned the property as of January 1st, 2021. So a snapshot is taken on January 1st, 2021 of who the owner is, And then they have the legal liability to pay the taxes in 2022. That's why if you've ever bought or sold a house, the closing sheet will include provisions for sorting out taxes who in a fair way as between the seller and the buyer. And the reason that's done is to reflect the fact that we have this system that captures ownership in 1 year for payment in the next. Let's see. Next page, please. Okay. Let's see here. The whole idea of a bond. What is a bond? A bond is just it comes from the dual classification of stocks or bonds. Stocks being investments where you actually formally have an ownership interest in the company. Bonds are where you don't, where it's just basically a loan by the local governmental entity. So a bond is nothing more than a loan taken out by a local government or a state government. Okay, next page, please. Okay, let's skip over that one. Let's go to decrement. When you've created your TIF district in this hypothetical that I mentioned, it's possible that the value of company A would decrease, which, if to the extent it has to be, well, if there's a decrease in the in the base assessed value, let's say the company A burns down. Well, the assessed value that would have gone to the TIF district now has to go to restore the loss from the value that was in the base. So, okay, next, and that's referred to as decrement, the decrease. Okay, next slide, please. Next, just in the interest of time. We talked about incremental assessed value. That's in our hypo, the value that company B put in after the creation of the TIF district. Next slide, please. Let's see. Next slide. I'm trying to make sure I meet my time limit here. Yeah, if you could go to the next slide. So we talked about a TIF district. I thought you were getting rid of those, those visual things. Just kidding. I didn't know that was on there. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay, so hopefully you have a general handle on the concept of TIF. Single family residential TIF. As a general rule, when a TIF district gets created, as a general matter, only the assessed value from non-residential property is captured, and normally any houses stay in the base and continue to generate money for the units. However, a few years ago, the legislature passed laws saying that under certain circumstances, local communities could, excuse me a second, I thought I had that off. That local communities could set up TIF districts that captured residential TIF. What that means is that if a housing developer comes to your town, you're able to set up a residential TIF district that will capture and allocate to the redevelopment commission taxes paid by single family residents is that get built after the after the TIF district is created. Counties have a much harder go of doing this program than cities and towns. So let's just for now focus on cities and towns. There is, generally speaking, a rule that says that to qualify to set up a residential TIF district, you have to be able to show that you've had less than 1% average growth in housing in your city or town in the last 3 years. However, last year or the year before, the law got changed for cities and towns to say that you can bypass that rule if you can if you create an what's called an economic development target area, which is really a nothing burger to do. So in cities and towns, you need not worry about that 1% limit. That's significant because it was an impediment before the law changed to loosen that up. Probably, though, the most important thing is that you have to have the approval of the school board. If you're going to start down this road, you want to make sure right on the front end that you get the school board approval, because the town or city can end up doing a lot of work and can find out after, understanding that there wouldn't be an issue. All of a sudden an issue can pop up and maybe the school corporation really doesn't want you to do this. So you really need to get that approval early in the process. The general TIF creation provisions apply to this sort of TIF district. When the way the incentive is usually used is the developer comes to town with a proposal to build housing and wants to know what incentives you have. And you can say, well, we could create a residential housing TIF district, and we could give you, developer, the benefit of the increment that gets generated by the new housing. That's very significant. Now, usually you have to have the developer agree to buy the bonds or to back the bonds. But it can be a whole lot of money, and it can make the difference on whether the developer is willing to do the housing in your city or town. So I was thinking of trying to stay brief here. I was thinking of a story about President Calvin Coolidge, who was known to be a man of few words. So I'm gonna cut this down here. So he goes to a dinner party, and the guy sitting next to him says, Mr. President, I was told I had made a bet on whether I could get more than 3 words out of you at this dinner. President Coolidge looks him dead in the eye and says, you lose. So with that, I'll follow Calvin's lead and end it there.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much. I do have a question for you, Mr. Pittman.
Yes.
So if a community takes out a TIF for possible housing, and the community doesn't end up building the housing or using the TIF in that manner, what happens to it?
Well, you would normally, what happens to the TIF revenues?
Yes.
You know what? That's a good question, because unless you get commitments from, the developer isn't likely to do the deal unless you've promised him the money. So you're not really going to see that situation in practice. If there's a TIF stream being generated, then that means somebody's built something, and that means the party who built it has probably asked you for that TIF in advance. So I don't think you're ever going to get there.
So it's an unlikely situation.
Very unlikely, because you're not going to bother to set up the district usually, although some places do. as a practical matter, what you could do is just wait for another housing developer to come along. And if you've got some TIF stream, you could maybe give them the benefit of it.
Oh, great. All right. Do we have any last minute questions for our guests here today? Again, I want to apologize for our midstream technical failure. We are glad that you came back, and we will be editing this video, so it will be one video and posting it on our website along with the links to the information that our speakers have provided. So here we have another question. The community built a road to a college in hopes of development, and due to COVID, nothing has happened. Do you have a timeline? I'm assuming that's on TIF as well.
Well, your TIF district clock for the life of the TIF district is a maximum of 25 years, but that doesn't start until you've issued debt payable from TIF from that area. So there is no harm or no loss, no disadvantage as a result of a delay.
Right, and no funding goes into the TIF unless there's actual increment that's been developed in that area.
Exactly, that's exactly right. So it kind of, yeah, I mean, a lot of these incentives end up being self-policing. That is to say, you know, you promise the developer the benefit of the TIF, but it's up to them to do the project to generate it. So,
okay.
The only problem, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say you only should commit to pay that, to give them the benefit of the TIF as and to the extent it arises, period. So.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more TIF question, and while
Sure.
we're doing that, our other guests, our speakers, can come on the screen because I think I have a question that could be answered by any of them. But should we wait to sell land to the developer until after the TIF has been finalized, or is it okay to proceed with the sale now? So would you want to do the TIF before there was a transfer of property ownership, or does it matter?
I would want the developer to either have bought the needed property or to have a firm commitment to do so. You don't want to go to the trouble of doing all of the TIF if it's dependent on property acquisition that's not where there isn't site control. So I would either have that done or have a commitment for it to be done very early in the process.
Great. All right. So we do have some interest in infrastructure outside of water and sewer. And I know that's been our primary focus today because that's what I asked for. So thank you very much. But we do have some interest in finding products that would help pay for utilities such as gas or electricity. So I'm going to let Rochelle start. And then Mr. Pittman, I am curious about whether or not you can use TIF money for that too. But we'll let Rochelle go first, and then you can be next. And Christmas, if you've got
Okay.
chime in.
Okay.
So when it comes to gas in town, if the community is less than 20,000 in population, you can utilize community facilities loan monies for your gas project. We've done this in West Central Indiana for a couple of communities where, in fact, they owned their, and that's the crux, right? They owned their gas system within their town, and community facilities was the monies that they used to redevelop that gas line within their community. And it was a critical need. We were able to give them a 40-year term on that gas line. So there's an opportunity there with USDA Rural Development. And electric, we have a whole national program for electric. The reason that most people even know that we exist is we electrified rural areas in the 1930s. So we have an electric program that can be tapped into. I'm not that contact, but if you are interested in doing so, I can certainly give you a lead to where that contact can be connected with you. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Rochelle. So Mr. Pittman, can you use TIF for gas or electric?
You can use TIF for infrastructure of any kind, really, utilities, roads. And that's the classic use of TIF, in fact, and the most common use of TIF. The only limitation is that it generally needs to be limited to assets that the community owns. So it would be hard to do that, for example, lateral extensions to a privately owned building. But for general publicly owned infrastructure, absolutely, it's the most common use of TIF.
Great. Christmas or Bill, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Nope.
Okay, great. Well, in the interest of time, we will make that our last question. Again, sorry for our midstream interruption, but we appreciate everybody's patience. We will be now editing this video more than we thought to make it one video, and we'll be posting it on our website along with links to the information that's been provided by the speakers, probably end of the week or beginning of next week. Please feel free to share it with anybody that you think would be interested. And if you have any questions or concerns or topics that you want to discuss for future webinars, please let me know. Lisa Abbott, Regional Opportunity Initiatives again. Thank you very much. Thank you to our speakers. Really appreciate all the information that you provided to us today.